Okay, the subject for the next 45 minutes or so is integrated corridor management. I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is, how to go about planning for it, experience with it around the world, and some lessons from that experience. Back in 1973, the U.S. had a major highway program building the interstate system. And I'm sure you've heard of that, 41,000 miles, 70,000 kilometers of major highways all over the country. And people were noticing that even in places with a lot of highway construction, there was still a lot of congestion. So people began to think maybe we should spend some money on better managing what we had. And our parliament passed a law that created a special fund for what was called Transportation Systems Management. And we have a lot of acronyms in the United States. We play around with letters. And Transportation Systems Management was funded to the tune of billions of dollars. But after the billions of dollars, that program, the nickname was T, Transportation, S, Systems Management, TSM. Nobody noticed anything. No difference. Still gridlock, still poor public transport. So TSM began to be known as too small to matter. Billions of dollars and nobody knew where the money went. Too small to matter. At the same time, where I worked, in the Public Transport Authority, we were spending a lot of money on bus lanes, busways, all over the US. And again, people noticed that yes, they moved the buses a little faster, but most people still found public transport to be inconvenient, unsafe, insecure. And we heard a little bit about some of those reasons in the transfer presentation yesterday, this notion of integration. So that was the genesis of this thing called integrated corridor management. The idea that we would combine public transport and traffic management into one package. We don't just do public transport, we don't just do systems management, we combine them. Pardon? This may be a little different than what you have. Okay. So we combine them in one package, and we're going to see why we combine them in a little bit. And we do it in a corridor or a small area. The north corridor of Karachi, the west corridor of Delhi, or a sub-area, Old Delhi, or the eastern part of Nairobi. We don't do it all over. We focus on one place. So that's essentially what it is. But the important point is we focus on people-moving performance. People-moving performance, not cars. And we also focus on moving goods, trucks, better as well. So people and goods, not cars. And we do it through a variety of techniques. We're going to learn about that. Now, why is it so important? No matter what city I've worked in, and I've worked in a lot, there are streets, even in New York, even in our town, Washington, and for sure in places like Mumbai, Delhi, Kampala, etc., where most of the people moving on that street are either walking, in bicycles, or in public transport of some kind. Whether it's a metro, whether it's a bus, whether it's a minibus, a taxi, a danfo, or people walking and biking. And yet, when it comes to how we use road space, that road space is primarily devoted to the couple of % of the people who are rich enough to afford cars. So even where we have the money for the road space, we don't give the road space to the largest benefit that we can. So we need to recognize that fact and maybe start using that road space primarily different. And the primary reason for that is most mayors, most governors, most commissioners, party chairmen, whatever the leaders are, usually think about one or two solutions. Whatever the transport problem is, they think there's two solutions, just two. What are those solutions? What do they usually think? Pardon? No. More roadway capacity or a metro, right? The tough part is the stuff that's in between, that if you don't do it, the roadway capacity or the metro aren't going to work as well as they can. Now, this is Beijing Ring Road 2. Okay, this was the first ring road built in Beijing, and what do you notice about it? It isn't exactly doing well. This was on a Sunday. Same ring road. What do you notice about it here? Who can tell me what they see here? Ring Road 2 in Beijing. And by the way, there's a metro line underneath this ring road. Also, line 2. What do you notice about it? I notice two things. First of all, traffic isn't moving. What else do you notice? All right, it's congested, but isn't there anything else that you see there? What else? All right, lots of cars. What else do you notice?
Also, there are buses with no...
Right. Now, when we spoke to the traffic police and to the people in Delhi, excuse me, I have Delhi on my mind, in Beijing, why is it that you can't do something to make the buses work better on Ring Road 2? They said, oh, it'll screw up traffic. Well, most of the people there are in these buses, maybe 25 times as many people as there are in the cars. But we can't do anything for the buses. So there's two things. Ring Road 2, big road, lots of money, and by the way, this road was built on the walls of Beijing that had been built by the Mongols in the 12th century. So it destroyed the cultural heritage of Beijing and really didn't solve a problem. Now, here's Ring Road 3, number 3, just outside the bank office. These are pictures taken by the bank's professional transport photographer from the bank office.
Sam Zimmerman.
Right, yeah, anyway, but what do you notice about Ring Road 3? Right, not moving. And frankly, if you could count, if you could see them, you'll notice here, same thing, lots of buses. Is there any treatment at all for the buses where most of the people are? Nothing. 40 kilometers around, no bus lanes. Nothing. Nada. Zip. Bupkis, as we say in Hebrew. Anyway, now the interesting thing about Beijing today is there are 5 ring roads. Every one of them looks like this, and in fact, one of the jokes in China is that if Beijing and Shanghai keep on building ring roads, someday they'll be able to build a ring road that will serve both cities. And they're 1,000 kilometers apart. Anyway. So one of the things about integrated corridor management is we are willing to maybe inconvenience the few people that are using cars, not to hurt them, to inconvenience them so that the majority of people can do a better job. The other thing is we are about moving people. And one of the objectives in that moving people is not only to reduce congestion, but also to improve safety and security for them. At the end of the day, we hope we're better off in all directions. Now, this is my speech about bus lanes. These cities have bus lanes. This is the first bus lane built in China. This was the before picture in Seoul, before Dr. Kim's reform. They had a bus lane. This was a bus lane right here. And here are the bus lanes on ETSA in Manila. Now, what do you notice about those bus lanes? Yeah, the buses aren't moving. In addition to the fact that the ones in Manila are spewing black smoke in all directions, turning all the buildings black, making it impossible to breathe. In addition to that, the buses aren't moving, but they have bus lanes. So obviously, if all we do is build highway capacity, and all we do is provide bus lanes, we're missing out on something. So that's the genesis. Here, we see some illustration of traffic management, okay? One of the differences between integrated corridor management and how we've done traffic management traditionally is, for some reason, most traffic engineers who could work for the traffic police or the traffic management authority, they think their job is moving vehicles, right? Get them as fast as possible. This is different because we're focused, again, on people, not on cars, which means what we do, how we measure it, will be different in concept because we want to focus on the largest numbers of people. Now, if you're walking in a bicycle or using public transport, congestion is a problem, no question. Because the buses, even the buses going to the metro, so it affects metro too, are stuck in traffic. But what besides congestion? If you ask a public transport user in Delhi or in Nairobi or in any of our cities, what about public transport don't you like? They're going to answer a lot more than the fact that the buses are moving slowly. This is a bank-financed project, ashamed to say, in Shenyang in China, Liaoning province. We helped them build this monstrosity right here, which is a ring road that I hope someday they tear down with bank money, like here in China. And in order to make that ring road seem like we were helping the city, this is from 20 years ago, they put bus lanes underneath it, right? Hey, there are your bus lanes. Now, what do you notice? This is a bus station. What do you notice about that bus station? Who can tell me? Just looking.
There's no space for people waiting.
All right, there's no space. Absolutely. Yeah, if they were as fat as most Americans are, their behinds would be in traffic, right? But what else do you notice about it besides that? No space. How do they get there? Who cares? The way they get is they run across the street right here. There's no traffic light. The traffic light is down here. But even if they could use the traffic light, and there's no pedestrian signal anyway, even if they could use that, how do they go from here to here? Right. That's exactly right. So here we have a bus lane that the World Bank helped build with a freeway over it, and you could say that the reason they built the freeways was to keep the rain and the snow off the buses, but I don't think that was the reason. And yet you can't get to or from the bus stop, and the bus stop is incredibly narrow. Same city, the bank wasn't involved in this. Now look at this bus stop. This is a busy bus route, right? How wide is the platform for people waiting? Not even a meter. So if someone with big feet, my son has feet like this, he couldn't wait for the bus here because his feet would be in the street, right? His toes would be in the street even though he was waiting. So that's how much space they give for the thousands of people a day waiting for the bus. And look at how much space they give to cars parked on the sidewalk. Here the cars are parked, and here's where the cars get to the parking spaces. How many people are parked here versus how many people are here? What do you think? 500 people, 500 times more people here than here. And yet, where's the road space? Okay. Now we have the issue of crossing the street to get to a bus stop. All right? Now, this is from Delhi. And I won't tell you where it is. Anybody here from it, you've got to tell me later where it is. So the bus stop is right here, but the buses can't get there. So the buses stop in the middle of at the end of the flyover, and people run across the street. And you'll notice what buses stopped here does to traffic on the flyover. But we built the flyover, and we thought we were doing things for people, right? And in fact, the flyover basically didn't do anything except make it worse for public transport. Doesn't matter. They can't get to the bus stop that is authorized. And the second thing is, forgive me, we're the traffic police. So sure, it's not authorized. So here we have a situation where we hurt people using public transport because of the flyover, right? And at the same time, really didn't do a whole lot for cars because the buses are stopping at the end of the flyover, so it backs up. Okay? Now this one here is another good one. This is a very, very busy bus route in what city? I won't tell you. It's in Vietnam, and it's not represented in this room. Very busy bus stop, and here we have a guy who is too old, like me, to use a motorcycle, which puts him in big trouble in Vietnam. So he sees his bus coming over here. He's old, and he's not good at running, got bad knee. What does he do? So if you asked him, is it congestion that's your transportation problem? He's going to say, not congestion, I can't get to the bus. It may take me a half hour to cross the street. Now, some people want to cross the road even if public transport's not involved. Even if it's not there, they may want to cross the street. These are pictures from various countries around the world. How many people have seen this? A mother with children. The children are clustered around the mother because they're so scared because they can't cross the street. This is one of my favorite pictures. It's a woman, obviously with her father, her elderly father, like me, crossing the street in front of the biggest hospital in a city of 7 million people. Biggest medical center. What do you notice about this? Nowhere to cross the street. For a guy, this is a blind person attempting to cross the street here. And here we have someone taking their children from school. So it's not just about congestion that we have trouble, because these people trying to cross the street make cars stop, cars slow up. And the more that happens randomly, the worse the street performs for people, even those in cars. And here we have, of course, people going to and from school. This is one of my favorite pictures. It's a city I work in. And again, you see multiple countries where kids must ride their bikes or walk in traffic to get to school. The reason I know they're in school is they're all wearing uniforms and carrying books. Okay, so that's the issue. Bottom line, you got to do more than bus lanes. Bottom line, you have to do more than build flyovers. Bottom line, congestion is not the only problem that we need to address. Now, why do we do it one corridor at a time? Number one, if we want to improve public transportation and we make one bus stop very nice and buy 10 buses where there are 1,000 buses operating in the corridor, no one will notice what we did, right? Number one. Number two, if all we have is bus lanes in a corridor and don't do anything about the stations, then public transport will still be unattractive. The other thing is nothing, and this is very important for leaders, I think, nothing breeds like yourselves. Nothing breeds success like success. So I go to the US Parliament every year and ask for $1 billion to give to cities to help them manage their systems. And the congressmen, and you know our congressmen are a little tough. You should know it over the last couple of days, right? They come back and say, you've gotten $1 billion a year for the last 10 years. Show me what you've done. Show me where you've improved performance. And what happened? We couldn't show it, so boom, the end of the program. So the nice thing about working in a corridor is you can show visible improvements. And what's the nice thing about showing visible improvements where everything in the corridor works better? There is nothing better for you to get more money to do other corridors than the first corridor. If you use the same money to improve bus stops, 165 bus stops all over the city, the mayor next year will say, so what? So we focus on a corridor one at a time because a lot of the improvements work together. Keep on thinking integration, integrated system. If you just build a metro and don't do anything for the buses, it's not an integrated system. If you just build BRT and don't do anything for local buses, you're missing out on a lot of benefits that accrue when you do these things together. The sum gives you more payoff than the individual parts taken together. Now, what does the process look like? And this is very similar. We're not going to go into detail on this, but it's very similar to any kind of planning process. We're not worried about strategic objectives, goals, vision here, because a lot of these things are shorter in time frame. But the first thing is figure out what's wrong. Why are the buses going so slow in a corridor? Why are so few people using the metro in a particular corridor? Why is it? How is it to get to the metro, get from the metro? So first, a very, very careful assessment of the problem. And again, we're not assessing it in terms of the movement of vehicles. We're doing it from the perspective of people, accidents, travel times, convenience. And we recognize, very important, that trips begin and end where? They begin and end at home, at school, at shops, at hospitals. They don't begin and end at a bus stop. They don't begin and end at a metro station or an airport or a railway station. They end and begin at home. So when we assess the issues in a corridor, we're not assessing just the issues on the roadway or on the metro line. We are assessing them in the travel shed, it's called in English, the travel market for the entire corridor. Then we come up with some potential solutions. And they're not just pulled out of the sky, they're addressing specific problems on the ground. Our buses are losing 10 minutes at this intersection. What do we do for that intersection? The customer satisfaction in this corridor is terrible because women will not use public transport. So that corridor is overwhelmed with three-wheelers and taxis, while the buses have spare capacity. Why is that? So we come up with solutions to the problems we identify, and frankly, a lot of them are one at a time, but some of them are broader. Then we evaluate them, and we evaluate them in two ways, very important. These are not big-ticket items. Build a metro, build a ring road, build a BRT line. We evaluate the small items one at a time. Can we change the intersection? Can we provide better sidewalks around the metro station and do a better job of managing traffic? We evaluate them individually, but then we evaluate them as a package. We take the best we can do, focused on a few perhaps isolated problems, but then we put them together and evaluate them as a package, because we know, particularly for public transport, that it's a system, and we need to evaluate how the system is doing, not just how the pieces are doing. Then we make a decision and we implement. And the evaluation process is always looking at people time. So if we change the signalization in a location where pedestrians cannot cross the street, and there are 10,000 of them crossing the street a day, it's okay to have a little delay, a couple of seconds, for a few thousand cars. So our evaluation process looks at the net of people driving, plus people walking, plus people in public transport. It doesn't focus on average speeds for cars. Everybody understand that? Very important point. The metric is travel time for people, not vehicle travel time. The metric is safety, not the number of accidents, but the numbers of people affected by those accidents and who they are. Anyway, the first step in this is picking a priority corridor. I don't want to go into detail, but I do want to say there are two issues, particularly for the first corridor. The two issues are, actually really three. How bad is the problem? Number one, relative to other places. How big is the potential benefit, which is really related to the first one? Obviously, you want to affect the largest number of people in the biggest problem corridor. But there's another criteria that's important for the first corridor. What are the potential benefits, and related, how bad is the problem? The other one is, can we really do something? Can we really do something? Because in some places the problem is overwhelming, and maybe politically you can do something after you've shown it'll work somewhere else. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Ahmedabad in India. It had the first successful BRT system. Well, the first route that they built was the one that was really easiest to build. There's roughly 80,000 riders a day on that first route. There are other routes where they could have gotten a lot more riders, but it would have been tough to build them without showing success. So the two items are potential benefits and the probability of success. And we know from our operations research, for an economist, if you multiply them together, that gives you a measure of likely benefit. So probability of success as well as potential benefits. And this is Wuhan, where we have big safety problems in China. These are pictures of accident locations. You see they're scattered all over, but when we looked at it on a corridor basis, it just jumped off the page. And these blue corridors here are where we have focused our integrated corridor management activities based on looking at the summation of problems corridor by corridor on safety and also ridership. Very high probability of success here. This is my favorite corridor, and the reason is it was a very wide roadway, poorly designed and poorly working, and no merchants, no parking on the sidewalk. Very easy to make improvements. So that's where we elected to start the process. Okay, very important on public transport. I mentioned there's a whole bunch of problems, but fundamentally we want to make sure we're not losing time. So we have to do a very in-depth time study. And one of my favorite things to look at is the fact that most time spent in using public transport is spent getting from it, getting to it, and waiting for it. It's not just time spent moving. And if you're on the vehicle, I'm on the bus, I'm on the train, the time that the bus or the train is stopped at a station is very important. There's a measure that we use in planning rail systems in metros. It's called dwell time at stations. In Washington, this is an aside, but I'll give you an illustration of that. The system was designed in Washington to be fully automated. You don't need drivers for the Washington Metro. But in order to keep the drivers awake, they configured, or off drugs maybe, they configured the cars so a driver had to go from one side of the driver cab to the other to open and close the doors. Okay? Open and close the doors. And that's why when you take the metro in Washington, you'll find that you'll pull into a station, the computer will stop the trains, and it could be 10 or 15 seconds before the doors open. Now you'd say, well, what's 10 or 15 seconds? And another 10 seconds after they close before the train starts moving. So that's 15, 20 seconds. Nothing, right? But let's say I live out by where Ajay lives in Bethesda, and I have to come through 30 stations or 20 stations to get to work. And I'm losing 20 seconds at each station. At the end of the day, that's a lot of time, isn't it? So we want to differentiate between time moving on a vehicle, time not moving on a vehicle, and time it takes to get to the terminals and the stops. That person in Vietnam, that old man, my colleague, who was waiting to cross the street, if he has to wait 5 or 10 minutes there, that's as if the bus or the train took another 5 or 10 minutes to move. And this is from a project I worked on in New York. It's in a corridor that is the busiest bus corridor in New York. It's the M15. It goes by the United Nations. Now, what do we notice about this? When we took a look at travel time, of the total travel time, the bus was only moving half the time, right? It was only moving half the time. And when it wasn't moving, it was either stopped at a stop, waiting for people to get on or get off, or waiting at signals. Now, why do you suppose, and this is, I'm not making this up, why do you suppose the buses were taking so much time at stops in New York?
For collecting the fares.
Partially for collection of fares, absolutely. Everybody, a lot of people were paying a cash fare. Crazy, right? And its exact fare, even with that, it was still a lot. Why else might it be that they were stopped so long? Pardon?
The time takes to board.
Of course, but why was it taking a long time to board and pay a fare?
Because sometimes we couldn't get into right next to the curb.
Right, they had to step down and step up. Any other reasons? How about old people? What would old people have to do with dwell time?
20 centimeters instead of 40 to put the bus on the same level.
But that's the steps. Okay, yeah. Old people go slower up steps. What else? How about this? That route carries 65,000 people a day. In the middle of the day, it's extremely busy. And even in the peak periods, there are a lot of older people on it, like myself. Now, why are the older people on the bus, not in the metro? Has anybody ever taken the metro in New York? Dangerous, crowded, no escalators, stairs. So a lot of old people tend to be on the bus. Now, what does that have to do with dwell time? Well, the buses in New York, they had articulated buses, 18 meters long on this route.
Go to the bathroom.
No. Bathroom on the bus? I mean, the trip is long, but it's not that long. No. 18 meters long, and they had two doors. One next to the driver, and one way in the back, right? The door in the front, when the driver pressed the button, it opened. The door in the back, you had to push a handle to get the door open, and that was where you were supposed to leave the bus. And the reason they had that was because of our lawyers, because if a passenger pushed the handle to get the door open and they fell out of the bus, the lawyers could go to work and say, look, it's your own fault, you weren't paying attention. Now, what does that have to do with old people? I get on the bus, me, at the middle of the day, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Who else is getting on the bus with me? The high school kids, right? Now, where are all the high school boys in particular going to be? They're going to be at the other end of the bus, right? And what are those high school boys going to be doing? Are they going to be behaving, sitting there like young gentlemen, reading their homework? Okay, so I'm an old person, right? Where am I going to sit? I'm going to sit near the driver. I get to my stop, all right? If I want to go to the back, I have to walk 15 meters to the back of the bus, by all those guys fooling around, and I've got to push the door open. I can hardly walk up the steps at my age. Are you kidding? I got a bad shoulder. Am I going to be able to push the door? So where do I go? I go out the front door. Why do I go out? It's illegal. Must go out the back door. What does the driver do? Nothing. So I go out the front door. So you have 10 people like me getting out the front door in the bus stop in front of the UN before anybody can get on the bus, and boom, the bus is stopped there for 10 minutes. End of story. Right? Now, what does that have to do with congestion? If we can fix that problem, now we can't get the high school kids to behave, right? But maybe what we can do is get the doors to open themselves and put more doors on the bus. And for fare payment, maybe we can have off-board fare payment. And to make sure people actually pay the fares, we can have roving policemen, inspectors that come on, and if you don't pay the fare, you have to pay a fine, right? Nothing to do with congestion, and yet that, what I've just described, plus buying low-floor buses and training the driver to get closer to the curb, 15% improvement in travel time. Another way of saying it is they saved millions of dollars a year because of old guys like me. They were able to accommodate their needs better. So that's why you do these customer satisfaction surveys as part of this. Data collection, yes. And they're not customer satisfaction surveys like you see everywhere in the world I'm using the train or I'm using the bus, and you say to the customer, do you like it? Yes, I like it. Okay, we don't have to do anything. Or if they say, no, we don't like it, well, what do we do now? They're not just designed to get awards for people liking it. 98% customer satisfaction. Worry more about the people that don't like it, that aren't using it, than the ones that do like it. Anyway, and we also have to worry about the condition of our vehicles. Are they filthy? Are they breaking down? Are they getting into accidents? Why are there so many accidents? Now here's one of my favorite pictures from Urumqi, which is it's closer to Delhi than it is to Beijing in Xinjiang province. Right here, not in the picture, next door to each other is the biggest middle school in that province. This is a city of 4 million people, Urumqi, right? So right here, biggest hospital, biggest middle school. The street right here, where these buses are plying, 600 meters between signals. The bus stop is in the middle. So this bus stop is 300 meters from a traffic signal there and a traffic signal here. And yet there are thousands of people using the bus stop every day. Now, at night, maybe they could get on the bus over here, but at least once a day they got to cross the street. Okay? So you have sick people, old people, children by the thousands crossing the street with no protection. And I have to tell you, when we started the process and asked the traffic police, and I'm going to talk more about the traffic police, whether it wouldn't be a good idea to put a signal there and some protection for pedestrians, the officer in charge said, we can't do that, it'll slow up traffic. I mean, well, it should have been slowed up. Anyway, so obviously it's not enough to say it's unsafe. We have to look over the whole corridor, because the speeds in the corridor are they're really corridor based. We need to calm things down in the corridor if we have a big accident problem. Now, one of the things that in these TSM, too small to matter studies that my office was involved in, we never looked at pedestrians. If somebody said, we need to do a better job of moving pedestrians to and from our metro stations, to and from our bus stops, the traffic engineers would have looked at me like I was nuts. You want to collect data on who? What? Pedestrians. Who are they? So we have to do that. We have to understand their needs also. And as Ajay and OP both said, it's not enough to worry about the symptoms of the sickness. We need to focus on the causal factors. Okay, very important. Now we have an understanding of why we have problems, segment by segment, intersection by intersection, stop by stop, station by station. Now, what are the strategies? Well, first, a very good starting point in public transport is the service plan. Too many buses trying to crowd into one place? Are we collecting fares efficiently? Are the routes going where they need to go? Are we forcing buses to take left turns on streets that don't have left turn signals, as a case in point? So we worry about fare collection, we worry about the operating and service plans, and we try to manage the system better. There are infrastructure changes that we need to consider, right? And yes, busways, median busways, curb lanes. Sometimes maybe we need to have special lanes on the shoulder of highways for buses. We need to worry about station stops and terminals. If we have a situation where people have to wait on the highway in the rain or in the hot sun, maybe that's not going to make public transportation a very desirable place to be. And then here's some illustrations of bus lanes. And by the way, one of the reasons that I personally like colored bus lanes, like you see here in Seoul, yeah, you got to spend money, but it's very hard to argue with the traffic police. This is in Liaoyang, China, New York, and this is in Coventry, UK. If the street lane is green and you're there and you say to the officer, I didn't know it was a bus lane. What are you, stupid? Come on. Why is it green or why is it red? A lot easier to help. These buses here, I won't tell you where, the mayor said, I need a metro because the buses are too crowded. Now look, how big are these buses? These buses are 10 meters long. So my thought was, hey, did you ever think of getting bigger buses? How about that for a starter? Anyway, so obviously you can change the vehicles. Access, very important. Most of what prevents people from using public transport is the difficulty, particularly for women, of getting into and from it. We find in a lot of African cities where motos, where motorcycle taxis are very popular, and also to a degree in South Asia where three-wheelers are, women don't like to walk in the mud. Guys, like our children, and our sons in particular, my son, when he was 10 years old, not only did he like walking and not mind walking in the mud, he wanted to walk in the mud. But if you have a working woman outside the house on the way to work, the odds are walking in the middle of a dirt road to get to the bus stop's not going to be such a smart idea. The other problem with women in particular is coming home at night, walking up the street in your quarter where you live, in the dark, in the middle of that mud street. Imagine, who's going to want to do that? So one of the things that we see in a lot of bank projects now that involve integrated corridor management is street lighting. And I remembered back in 2007 going to speak to one of the big babus, if you'll pardon the expression, the big shot, high official at the bank that controlled a lot of money, about what were the kind of activities we were going to do with this new program. What kind of things were we going to support? And Fanke and I said, well, street lighting and sidewalks. And he said, this is a quote, what does that have to do with public transportation? Okay, end of story. So, okay, bike parking.
What are the speed tables?
Pardon?
Speed tables using
Those are the bumps that slow people up, particularly around schools, particularly around bus stops. That's another, there's a lot of different words for them. Traffic humps, sleeping policemen. That's what that is. Anyway, bike parking. One of the things that a lot of people that have put bike parking at metros, at light rail lines, at BRT stations, and bus stops have found is you can never have enough. You can never have enough parking. Why? Because the number of people that can walk, even if you had a good sidewalk system and street lights, is obviously always going to be smaller than the number that can ride a bike almost anywhere. And this is one of the busiest terminals of the busiest BRT line in the world. This line has 1 million riders a day, and you'll notice they have bike lanes parallel to the BRT line to help people get to the stations. Now, this was the before picture in Urumqi. Remember the hospital? This is what we built, and this is what the traffic police came up with. This is a pedestrian island, protected, colored red, and over here is the signal. So there was the before picture, and there you see the medical center. This is from the other side of the street. You see the medical center? All right? So protection, ITS is very fancy. There's a million different things you can do with that, from giving priority to buses to passenger information. Now traffic management. And you all should be familiar with that list of strategies. They include, number one, parking. If you think about how much you spend to build highway capacity and then to give it away to someone parking on it or selling toothbrushes and underwear, it's remarkable. But you can't just say, don't park there. You obviously have to have a way of accommodating goods delivery and people that actually need to park. So there's a two-way strategy, managing parking and providing it in some way. Obviously, there's a million things you can do at intersections. I noticed here traffic signals and automated programming. Remember from the first day I mentioned that New York City has 14,000 traffic signals. How many does your city have? Now, OP, using his diagnostic tool, 8 million people, 14,000 traffic signals. Saigon has how many traffic signals and how many people? I don't want to embarrass anybody, but my point is, you don't just throw traffic signals out there. But traffic signals do help manage traffic and provide for pedestrians. Other things you can do, turn prohibitions, speed restrictions. People should not be going fast in residential neighborhoods where children are playing in the street. Access control. We showed a picture in Manila of this 16-lane wide street where people can park on the road to go get a sandwich. Not a good idea. And then obviously there's some other things you can do. There's something called a queue jumper, that even if you can't get a bus lane over the whole length of a corridor, maybe you can get a special lane at an intersection to allow the bus to get out of traffic at the intersection and get to the head of the line. Something we're doing a lot in China now is what can we do with big businesses like the technology companies in India, for an example, and now in China, the big manufacturers, to get more of their people to use company buses or to carpool with other people. So those are some traffic management strategies. These are, two of these are from New York, and we see the colored lanes. New York has a law. Every bus is equipped with a camera. If you are caught at a bus lane or parked in a bus stop, you automatically get a fine. And you can't argue your way out of it. You may not pay the fine, but then you can't register the car again. Okay, here of course is the famous congestion pricing. And if this was Singapore, they would tell you that they don't have bus lanes on their expressways. And the reason they say, even though they have a lot of buses, why do they say that they don't need bus lanes? Because thanks to electronic road pricing, their expressways operate very well, very high speed all the time. This is an example of what I said by a queue jumper. Buses here were having a hard time getting through this intersection to this street. So when a bus comes, this light here turns red. All the cars have to stop, and the bus goes like this and goes onto the street ahead of everybody else. Because this is where the buses were getting hung up, right here in this particular location. Interesting story here. When the first BRT line in Mexico City was being built, and this BRT line, by the way, now is almost exclusively 24-meter-long buses and has 800,000 daily riders. When it was first being built, there were discussions with the traffic engineers about eliminating left turns because the signals were taking too long, and that was slowing everybody up. And the traffic engineers said, absolutely not. Otherwise, people will travel all over the place and will be forcing more traffic because they'll be avoiding it or will have to have problems enforcing it. So the BRT engineer said, well, can we get no left turns during construction? And the traffic engineer said, yes, only during construction. They never took the signs down. So it seems to be working. And then, of course, pedestrian safety. I'm running out of time. Who can tell me what's wrong with this picture? Not what's wrong with the picture in terms of too light, too dark, but what does this tell me immediately is wrong here? What's wrong with this? 99 seconds for the through movement, 30 seconds for a turn. This is in the new golf capital of, called Haikou of China, Hainan Island. More golf courses than Las Vegas, they say. Anyway, what's wrong with the picture? And there's going to be special points on the final for anybody that gets this right. What's wrong with this picture? Pardon?
Where's the time for the pedestrians?
Number one. So you get to some special points, not the whole story though. Okay, so there's no evidence that there's a pedestrian cycle. Why else is this bad? Why is this bad for people? Maybe good for cars, but why is it bad for people? Anybody? Well, first of all, these two directions are the same. They're two busy streets, right? So if we add 30 to 100, we get 120 seconds, right? So we add 120 seconds to 120 seconds, we get 240. That means that the cycle distance, the cycle length, is 4 minutes. Now, if there's a bus every minute, that means every time the light turns green, we have 4 buses waiting to get through. All right? Number one. and they all arrive at the stop at the same time. So if we have this at every signal, we're going to have 100 buses per hour at one stop. 100 in the first minute and none for the rest of the hour, number one. So this is terrible for public transportation. The longer the cycles, the worse they are for public transportation. And you mentioned pedestrians. There are no pedestrians on the planet. Not in China, not in India, not in London, nowhere that will wait 4 minutes to cross the street. Period. End of story. So you want to know why so many kids are getting killed here? And by the way, it's overwhelmed with students because there are schools right around here. Why are the kids getting killed? Right. We talk about what's the problem. So a very simple thing to reduce accidents with children here, number one, pedestrian phase, and number two, reduce the cycle length. Okay, parking management, can't say enough about it, but remember, you can't just eliminate it on the street. You have to do something to provide alternatives. And then, of course, enforce the rules. And this applies to parking and everything else. This is one of the busiest bus stops in Urumqi. And what do you notice about the bus stop? When we spoke, I don't want to pick on the traffic police because I'll tell you in a second how important I think they are. The traffic police said, well, we can't get cars not to park on the sidewalk because that's where the owners of the shops in the mall park. What? Let them figure out where to park. We have 5,000 trips a day, 5,000 on, 5,000 off at this bus stop, right? So enforce the rule. And the rule in Urumqi is no parking on sidewalks. Now this is New York. We're looking here on 42nd Street towards Times Square, right? Tens of thousands of people using the bus on this street. What's happening? Obviously the bus lane's useless. All right, once we come up with some feasible, potentially good ideas we think will work, put them all together and then evaluate. And again, evaluate them in terms of people time, people accidents, severity, not vehicles. All right, what cities have used this approach? The number is huge. More and more they're taking an integrated corridor approach. What's the experience been? London did this in about 40 corridors and doubled their bus ridership in 10 years. So it works. New York, Dublin, China. The list is fairly long. One of the more interesting ones is there was a reform of the bus system in Stockholm where they created a whole bunch of integrated corridors and did corridor management. And they got a huge increase in bus ridership. And about half of those people, the increase came from metro. People left the metro to use the bus because the bus then became competitive with the metro. What are the lessons of all these places? What do we learn from doing this integrated corridor management? And this is something that you're going to see a lot of. You guys are leaders here. We're talking about you. You need to become champions of this. And you also need some political backup. Very important, you're hearing this over and over again, communications. Not because we as planners, economists, and leaders, engineers can't make decisions, but if the merchants think that they will be hurt, even though they may not be at all, they're going to become enemies. So communications isn't because we're going to take an idea from everybody in the street, forget professionalism, forget the fact that the chairman and the managing directors were appointed or elected to actually make decisions, but communications is a way to avoid a lot of problems and to get some good ideas. Okay, when you're doing traffic management, when San Francisco was considering raising the price of parking and starting to restrict the number of cars coming into the city, they passed a law that all the money they would get from on-street parking proceeds would be used to improve the public transport system. They bought more new buses, they improved the stops, they improved the traffic signal system. So one of the nice things about these integrated traffic management and public transport is public transport becomes the thing that you can use to sell. Very important, I hate to say this, but this is a new concept in many of our cities. It's good to have some professional help. The last thing, do your technical homework. I mentioned data collection. You can't do this without some understanding, some analysis, and some data. Now, very important. What's the single most important group in this whole process of figuring out what the problems are and how to address those problems? It's the traffic police, right? And how many of us who aren't traffic police have worked in transport in the city, come up with some great ideas, and then come to the traffic police and said, this is what we should do? Crazy, right? Because who knows more about what's happening in the transport system in a city? And again, this is not just buses, it's not just cars, bicycles, this is metro as well. Who's going to tell you how you might fix access to a metro station? Who better than the traffic police? Who? Some politician? Come on. Anyway, so that's the point. When we undertake this work, we need to have, we call them in the bank, leading groups. We have project management units assisted by the traffic police, assisted by the public transport companies, all working together. And not assisted, meaning not we tell the police what we want them to do for us after we're finished. We've told the mayor says yes, and then we go talk to the traffic police. That, to me, is a prescription for nothing being done, number one. And number two, if we've decided what to do without talking to the traffic police, the odds are it's not going to work anyway. They're the ones that we need to have help us in this process. Anyway, that's integrated corridor management. I hope I didn't offend anybody. Anyway, that's it. Any questions now that we're 10 minutes late? Pardon? Yeah, it's on the computer. Yeah, for sure. I like to change things in the 5 minutes before, so it may not be in your book. Oh, you just, okay. Disagreements, what did I miss? Integrated corridor management. Key words for the process. Integrated. Public transport's an integrated system. It's not just buses. It's not just trains. And that integration starts and ends at home, offices. Comprehensive. You need to do it across the entire public transport system, the entire roadway system. Complementary. If you add the benefits from all these things individually, you'll get less than if you actually implement them together. Cooperative. Again, if you aren't getting people to help you in the run-up through good communications process, if the merchants think that you don't care about them, they're going to lose their parking, or you're going to put a bus stop in front of their store that's going to hurt their business, then you've got enemies all up and down from the beginning. So communications, cooperative, complementary, comprehensive, and integration. Thank you very much.